This is a staff that can win a title. I don't know that they're going to win a title, but they can win a title. They are that talented. It's been finalized. We'll let you know what's going on. This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran of the national media at Yahoo Sports. Also did a little bit of time at WSMV in Nashville. Today on the show, we talk about a real championship caliber coaching staff that Lane Kiffin has assembled for 2024 and talk about Billy Glascock and tell you why this is awesome and what the heck a GM is and why it's in vogue right now. This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast, your daily show on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. One thing that we learned, and what the main thing that we learned this week, is Ole Miss football is legit putting together a staff, putting together a roster, both of which are probably the most talented roster and coaching staff that Ole Miss has had in my lifetime. Lane Kiffin has done an absolute phenomenal job of acquiring talent. That's both on the field, off the field, and on the sideline. Lane Kiffin has done everything he needs to do. Now, the first two names that I want to talk about today is Joe Cox and George McDonald. These are two assistant coaches that we talked about, but as you can see from the tweets that we put up, it has been finalized. George McDonald has a background at NC State. He has a background at Illinois. He played at Illinois. He has an NFL list. He is a perfect X's and O coach to complement what Ole Miss has. When I say what they have the best wide receiver room in the nation. You want somebody that can maximize their ability. You're not looking for a Derek Nix to acquire talent. You think you are at the point where the talent is where it should be. You're looking at maintaining at this point. I think that George McDonald is going to be able to do a heck of a job getting people ready to go and maximizing that offensive unit that has Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, Deion Smith, Marquis Willis, Aiden Williams, Caden Lee. Those guys will be maximized by the strength of George McDonald. And then you look at also Joe Cox got brought in. He was at Alabama just a year ago. And if you were on Alabama's coaching staff, you can coach. Nick Saban has done a really good job at hiring. That's what he made his name on. And with Lane Kiffin, with Pete Golding, it's been home run pretty much consistently over the course of 17 years with Caden Prescorn, Daquan Wright, Hudson Wolf, and with the new tight ends coming in, Dylan Hip, and with Javante Connor in the building. That's 5 deep of players that Joe Cox gets to work with. He is known as a little bit of a superstar recruiter, and he also can coach very well. He was a quarterback at Georgia. I think he was there when Matthew Stafford was there. He's from North Carolina originally. That was the big competition at that point. Will it be Stafford or will it be Joe Cox? And Stafford ended up winning out, as we saw with Matthew Stafford going to the Super Bowl. But Joe Cox has turned into a pretty healthy coaching candidate. He's been at Colorado State, South Carolina. He's been at Alabama. I think he even did a year at Charlotte. But Joe Cox has had an interesting thing. But X's and O's wise, Ole Miss got a lot better with the coaching staff. Now, the news that broke yesterday, and this is the new thing, is Lane Kiffin is hiring Billy Glasscock as Ole Miss's GM. Sources tell ESPN. Glascock was Steve Sarkisian's player personnel guy at his last 3 years at Texas and previously served in similar roles at NC State and Minnesota. Glascock has a strong reputation as a keen talent evaluator. Now, what is a general manager? In this age of the NIL and transfer portal and all of this stuff where personnel departments have become a lot of kind of a mind of their own. It's become a self-contained organism living inside the football facility in a situation that the head coach and the 9 at that time assistant coaches, they were able to handle all the personnel, all the eligibility. They did everything. But it's gotten to the point where there's so much work that has to be done. That isn't enough. I call it the Nick Sabanization of college sports. And a GM essentially does everything that the head coach doesn't want to do that is off the field related. This will allow the coaches to do some on-field stuff. They can do some separation of church and state stuff. You can have large staffs on either side. And Ole Miss has a really large staff at the moment. Not necessarily saying that's a negative. I'm just saying there's a lot of people doing stuff between analysts, between player personnel people, working the portal, videographers doing recruiting as well. All of this was handled whenever I was at Ole Miss by Kent McLeod, one person. Now there's a staff of about 30 people doing something like that. People like Alex Collins and Kelvin Bolden and those guys, they're handling the player personnel. The GM manages all of that, all of the capology stuff. And I know there's no salary cap in NIL, but all of that stuff is done headed up by him. He's kind of like the department head of all of the off the field stuff. So what Austin Thomas did at Ole Miss, and I got a phone call sometime last week that said he was gone. I need to do a show on it. And I was like, listen, I would love to do a show on it, but it would take 25 minutes for me to explain what he does and why this loss would be important for Ole Miss fans to keep an eye on. It's just a person leaving to most people whenever they say he calls himself a GM, but the head coach is his boss. That's flipped from the way that people understand a GM in the NFL. So Austin Thomas leaving, he handled all of that off the field stuff. He basically built how to do that. Started nearly 10 years ago at LSU, where he made a name for himself. And once that happened, everybody else started playing catch up. And in about 2022, 2023, last year, it got to the point where I'm not necessarily worried about that position should Austin Thomas leaves or something like that, because it has become so prevalent around college football. There are other people that can do a lot of the same stuff. So now that I've said all of that, what is Ole Miss getting with Billy Glascock? Glascock started his career as a coach in the junior college ranks, spending time at Arizona Western and Joliet Junior College before serving as a recruiting operations assistant and assistant strength and conditioning coach at Northern Illinois for 2 years. That's with Jerry Kill, by the way. Keep that in mind. In 2011, Glasscock followed Jerry Kill from Northern Illinois to Minnesota to serve as the director of recruiting operations, kind of a proto GM, if that would, where national recruiting analyst Tom Lemming named Glasscock one of 5 national directors of recruiting operations of the year. He was really good at his job, and he made his name at Minnesota. This is before PJ Fleck and Row Your Boat. This is back with Jerry Kill, and he was able to build his name and have that. 3 years later, Glasscock became the director of player personnel for North Carolina State, overseeing the recruiting staff and directing all recruiting activities. When Glasscock first connected to the Texas job earlier in the week, 24/7 director of recruiting Steve Wiltfong classified Glasscock as one of the best in the business due to his ability to organize, evaluate, and recruit. That kind of sounds like what you're looking for in this job. At Minnesota, Glasscock helped identify 10 future NFL draft picks who didn't have any other Power 5 offers. Think about that. No other Power 5 offers, 10 players drafted. That means he can evaluate. He has a keen eyes for what he's looking for. And if you want to take it up to the next level, we'll tell you about that in a second. But walk-on linebacker Blake Cashman went in the 5th round of the NFL draft. But Glasscock also excelled in the 3rd area too, recruiting, helping land some of the highest rated players to sign with Minnesota and North Carolina State. All big time stuff. So why him, obviously, other than being good about his job? Why does hiring Billy Glasscock help Ole Miss have a championship level staff? Well, you look at him when he got to Texas, and he got there in, I think, 2021. He went there with Sarkisian. And look at the talent that in 3 years, you took Texas from being okay, they were a 7-8 win ball club, to being a perennial national power. And that's exactly what they've been. They've recruited well in the transfer portal. They've recruited well overall. Now, they have more money than God. That's not what I'm saying. But you still have to evaluate the right players to bring in. If you can have all kinds of money, if you bring the wrong people in, all you're going to be is like the Yankees whenever they have a bad team and finish fourth in their division with the highest payroll in baseball. That's what that looks like. But he identified the right players, figured out how to get them, and Texas got incrementally better over 3 years to where they were the dominant team by far in the Big 12 going into the college football playoff last year. And you could see where he might try and do some of the same stuff as well. Now, I'm not downplaying necessarily Austin Thomas. I'm saying that I think for what Ole Miss needs right now, I think Ole Miss upgraded with Billy Glasscock. And that is something that I did not think that I was going to say when I got that phone call last week. It's absolutely nuts. Thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. We're just getting started. Ole Miss just has a massively huge basketball game tomorrow at the Pavilion. And it's being treated that way. Happy Super Bowl Sunday to all who celebrate. Well, next week, Super Bowl Sunday, America's #1 sports book. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is about scoring the best seat on the couch and grabbing your best football snacks and placing some super duper bets. My favorite part about the Super Bowl is just the ambiance the whole day. The whole thing. Like, I'm going to be in there watching TV at noon on a documentary for the NFL Today or some sort of ancillary programming that the Super Bowl is going to put on. All of the player graphics, all of the cameras that are going in, the way it looks a little bit differently. I'm going to enjoy all of that. And even if your team is not playing in Super Bowl, they still have ways that you can have a W or so on that day. Not only can you bet on Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, color Gatorade probably that is going to be dumped on the winning coach's head. New customers, you can join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel. It's an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Locked On has launched its first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so the coaching staff came together better than I can possibly imagine, and everybody should be very excited about that. If you go on the basketball side, Tuesday night was an absolute nuts day for Ole Miss basketball. They put about 10,500 people inside the Pavilion. Don't tell the fall marshal. The atmosphere was raucous. It was loud. The love is gone, the fan involvement, everything. Ole Miss has figured out fan involvement at sporting events. They did a nice job of pumping energy into that place, and props on them. But Ole Miss has a hugely massive basketball game on Sunday evening against the Auburn Tigers, who beat Ole Miss by about 20 points at Neville Arena just about 2 weeks ago. So there'll be a factor of revenge that'll be in that game as well. That game has been a hard sellout for a while. I mean, a hard sellout. It's completely sold out. The Rebels host the Tigers. There's 5 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock Eastern at the SJB Pavilion. Now, you have a situation in this game where mid-court seats right now in the secondary market's going for about $600. It has a chance to be completely different. It's a massive, massive basketball game. It's really the first really massive game that Ole Miss has probably had in the Pavilion. They've had some massive games in the Tad Pad. I'm not saying they haven't, but in the Pavilion, this is a massive football or basketball game. So in this game, this is my concern. Auburn's a really good team. This has nothing to do with them and how good they are. Ole Miss performed and got the win. They kept their head against State on Tuesday night. In that atmosphere, it was there, but it took them a second to get going. If people remember that game, Mississippi State kind of jumped on Ole Miss and a couple of points in the first half, had a 7-point lead on Ole Miss at home. Other teams against Ole Miss at home have not done that. So I'm wondering after that first game, if that heart rate goes down just a little bit, so Ole Miss is prepared for this environment. Auburn is used to this. Teams play Auburn that way most all the time. So it will be imperative for Ole Miss to keep their wits about them. In the late 90s, early 2000, that time frame when Ole Miss was really good at basketball, in these games, when I knew that Ole Miss had a really shot to get going, early in the game, Ole Miss would start with a Keith Carter 3-point shot, a Mike White 3-point shot, and that would let me know that they're ready to go. They're locked in. So keep an eye on this Ole Miss Auburn game early, or at least somewhat early, as if Ole Miss shoots fairly well and keeps this relatively close, and they get to about 10 minutes, that's probably the magic time. Keep it to about 10 minutes to where it's fairly close to, Auburn might be up by 3 or Ole Miss is up by 3. If that is what it looks like at the 10-minute mark of the first half, it's going to be a ball game. Ole Miss has to worry about in this game not coming out ready to play. If they don't come out ready to play, Auburn has the capability to boat race them. But Auburn on the road has not been the same animal that you get at Neville Arena. So this is a game that, even though Auburn is going to be favored, this is a game that I think that Ole Miss has a chance to get that quad 1 win that's going to replace the Memphis game, because Memphis is just dookie right now. So this game is unbelievably massive, both for all the Ole Miss fans that are coming in. There's probably going to be some Auburn fans as well that have bought up some of the upper level tickets. So pay attention to that. But it'll be interesting to see exactly how the team responds. Ole Miss has a chance to go to 19-3. I think Ole Miss already has the best start in program history. Chris Beard's first year. And they have a chance to go 19-3 on the 3rd of February. To win one more game, you win 20, and you play Missouri twice. If Ole Miss beats Auburn and gets to 6-3 in the conference with 2 games against Missouri, I think Ole Miss would be kind of favored to win 10 games in the SEC this year. But all of a sudden, you're looking at 11 or 12 wins as what the benchmark might end up. A couple of teams are good, but there's no Tennessee coming up on the end of your schedule. You have Alabama. That looks like that could be really tough. You do have 2 games at South Carolina. Those are going to be tough. But you also have 2 games against Missouri. You also are going to play at Georgia at a time when Georgia's probably going to lose a couple games in a row. And you just have a chance to go on a little bit of a run. Ole Miss basketball is legitimately a good basketball team. I don't understand why people want to but that statement. Ole Miss is a good basketball team. But they still have to play Alabama. They still have to play at South Carolina. They still have Kentucky on the schedule. Kentucky lost to Florida at home, a team that Ole Miss beat at home by 20-something points and scored over 100 points in the game. It's gettable. You can do it. You just have to do it. And one thing that we learned this week, since the theme of this episode is what we learned, is that Ole Miss basketball, both men's and women's, are at the point where they're turning corners. Ole Miss and men's and women's basketball, like I do not have the score right now of the Vanderbilt game, but we're going to talk with Brantley Sanderson sometime this afternoon about that game and about the South Carolina game and get his thoughts on Coach Yo's Ole Miss women's basketball team. So excuse it not being here, but you're not missing anything. You're going to have it then. And we're going to get ready for that game against Auburn. We're planning on an instant overreaction after the Auburn game. And John Forcade, by the way, he'll be on here Sunday to where you can enjoy some great stories. He talked about the legend of him wearing an Ole Miss helmet in a Louisiana All-Star game at Tiger Stadium. He talked about the last-second touchdown against Mississippi State. He talked about the weird Los Angeles Rams touchdown that happened where there was 2 fumbles and he scooped and ran it like 85 yards. Really cool stuff. He also talked a little bit about Jackson Dart and what we can expect in a year 3 type situation. John Forcade's unbelievable dude. That's an interview that nobody wants to miss. So sellout, hard sellout in that ball game, and it should be a lot of fun. Still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're looking at the 2025 players to watch, and we look at the highlights from Jarobi, Hobson, and talk about this versatile linebacker next. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. So we're going to talk about Jarobi Hobson, and we're going through 2025 players to watch. So far this year, we've done a Kylan Deere and we've done Caleb Cunningham as 2 players to watch. Next up on the agenda is Jarobi Hobson. We're going to talk about a couple of other players. We'll leave that to be a little bit of a surprise in just a little bit. But Jarobi Hobson is from Lake Cormorant. That is the same school that Kamarion Franklin attended. He is a consensus 4-star player. Most everybody has him in their 250 or whatever they do about that. Rivals has him as high as 93. He's a consensus 165 level player. Consensus number 5 player in the state of Mississippi. Good ball player. If you look at their RPM, the recruiting prediction machine, those made up numbers where they try to determine where a player is going to go based off of media ops and things like that, to where they artificially assume that. Ole Miss is the leader in the clubhouse for that. Real easy to see about that because Ole Miss did a lot of stories on Jarobi Hobson with Kamarion Franklin, and Jarobi was in Oxford just quite a bit. And you look at this versatile linebacker, and let's go to the highlights. You can see him line up, and he's explosive off of the edge. But it's not just that. He can play defense at a very high level, and is probably where he's going to play at the next level is at linebacker. And he kind of profiles real similar to Suntarian Perkins. Not saying he's as good or anything like that. Not comparing him talent. I'm comparing them skill sets of what's going on. And you can look at him on the outside, but there's the trap that a Mississippi high school can fall into and they even did this with Suntarian Perkins, is you can play him everywhere. In 2 minutes of watching his video, I saw Jarobi Hobson line up at defensive end, linebacker, safety, running back, wing back, and tight end. And that is because he's the best athlete on the field. I mean, there's a reason he has been recruited by everybody. But This is a disservice, and it calls a player like this to have maybe the first year isn't what you expect it to be, and he could have a better first year than he did. Now, I'm not getting on the high school coaches or anything like that. That's the way it is. Whenever I was in high school at McGee High School, I mean, even though I was on a team that had Chris Mangum and Harold Shaw and Eddie Shaw and a bunch of guys that signed Division I offers, the best athletes moved around. Chris Mangum played in linebacker and tight end and defensive end, and that's because he was a special type athlete. Harold Shaw mainly played running back. Well, he also punted the ball and he returned kicks, and he played back safety whenever we were playing against a good team. He did some linebacker type stuff. The point is, most every high school in the state of Mississippi, if you are an elite player, you either play quarterback or you play everywhere. And Jarobi Hobson plays everywhere. But because of that, when you get to the next level, it's going to make it imperative that he early enrolls. Whatever role that they have envisioned for this athlete, they need him to get started on it, because it's going to be nice to have 15 practices without any consequences to teach fundamentals. So he's ready to go when fall camp starts. And Jarobi Hobson has a chance to be a really special linebacker. Pete Golding's going to be all over this player. All over this player. Brian Brown's going to be all over this player. I expect him to be involved as well. And Billy Glascock, the new general manager coming in, is probably going to spend the better part of the next month learning about the 2025 junior class and all the transfers that might be available for Ole Miss as they get ready for April 15th and the 2025 recruiting cycle. This is going to be imperative. Just because Billy Glasscock came from the Jerry Kill system, which, by the way, Jerry Kill going and helping out Vanderbilt, and those guys having the ability to find diamonds in the rough and make them a competitive football team, is kind of just what the doctor ordered for the Vanderbilt Commodores. And Vandy has a chance to do the most hilarious thing at Auburn this year. So I'm looking forward to that. But what we learned this week, okay? First, Jarobi Hobson, he's a ball player. He's a dog. And Ole Miss is going to recruit the heck out of this player. Period. Not saying he's a must-have. I don't believe in must-haves. If you've watched my show for any period of time, you know that I don't play that game. But he's a very important player in the state of Mississippi. Coaching staff-wise, championship-level coaching staff assembled by Lane Kiffin and Chris Beard and Coach Yo, honestly, has completely changed the culture of basketball at Ole Miss to the point where Ole Miss is kind of an everything school right now. And that's pretty cool to see, indeed. I'm pretty fired up about that. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. Every day as basketball season is in full swing. And Brantley Sanderson will be on the show this afternoon talking about Coach Yo's team and what we can expect moving forward and what he saw in the Vanderbilt game. We also have John Forcade Sunday, and it's about 30 minutes of awesomeness. I can't recommend that enough. For your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national news shows that cover every single league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy, everyone. Have a good weekend.